No, you're fine. No, it's okay. All right. Though I am loath to interrupt the chatting that is happening in the fellowship, I also want to be able to speak in a timely fashion and finish in a timely fashion. So I am going to begin. Good morning, everyone. Very, very happy to be with all of you today. The forum today, we're talking about the Triduum, which is a Latin, means just 3 days. And it's about the 3 holiest days in the church calendar, that being Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and then the Vigil of Easter into Easter itself. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about these 3 services and the way they sort of connect, and the liturgy that is one of the most beautiful and important liturgies of our church year. And so one idea that's, I think, helpful to think about is that the 3 services are really just one extended service. And I hope to make that clear as we talk about it further. This is an ancient tradition. These 3 services were celebrated and marked basically as early as the 3rd, 4th century. But they were lost for centuries, really. Part of this was that the Easter Vigil used to be the moment when new Christians were baptized. And so once it's normative to baptize babies, this matters less. Charlie, put your phone away. Hey, yeah, I got that power. So once infant baptism is the norm, that matters less. The other piece of it is that once all people in Europe are nominally Christian, these forms of gathering, these forms of making meaning, of sharing identity matter less. And so actually that's one of the gifts of this service is that as Christianity becomes less normative, this is an opportunity for us to make meaning together. So, Passover. So we are weird. Us English speakers are strange that we call it Easter. Most people call it some variety of Pascha. Most languages, and that comes from Passover. That the Greek, basically Greek just transliterates the Hebrew word, Passover, Pascha, and that becomes the word. Now, there is this confusion though. So the Greek word paschain means to suffer. And so fairly early, Christians begin to conflate Passover and suffering and kind of lose the Passover part and just focus on the suffering part. And so for centuries, the focus of Good Friday, the focus of Easter was Christ's suffering on the cross. That's where we get passion, the passion of the Christ. That's where that comes from. And so we lose this important piece of our tradition that the 3 days is our Passover. This is our remembering of this story that has bound Jews for centuries and then Christians along with them following. So, when is Easter? This is always a fun one to see if you actually know this. So the way Easter is calculated, because it moves around, it is the first Sunday after the full moon that occurs on or after the equinox. So the earliest Easter can be is March 22nd, and the latest the Easter can be is April 25th. This means that Easter has all of these springtime associations, which were certainly part of Passover, the understanding of Passover, and then get incorporated into Easter as well. So lambs, yearling lambs being born, the first shoots of crops of grain coming up, this all gets incorporated into the Passover worship as well as the early Easter worship. Now, before we talk about the Triduum, I do just want to linger for a second on Palm Sunday. So Palm Sunday is the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. We will mark Palm Sunday next Sunday. And an important piece of this is the misunderstanding about who Christ was. So the expectation that religious people had at that time was that a Messiah would come and would liberate them. And this idea of the Messiah, the Christ, was a sort of warrior king a la David, or maybe a prophet who would somehow bring God's power and wrath onto the Roman Empire. And so there's this belief that when Jesus is entering Jerusalem, all the people who are cheering for him believe that Jesus is bringing the doom of the Roman Empire, that he is marking the end of occupation by foreign forces and the liberation of Judaism, of Jews in Jerusalem and in Judea. Obviously, that's not the way it happened. But that is an important piece to remember, that when we are celebrating on Palm Sunday, we're celebrating a misunderstanding of who Christ is and what he was called to do. Now, early Christians, here's actually a picture of Jerusalem last year on Palm Sunday. Early Christians marked Palm Sunday with processions carrying palm fronds. This was by 3rd, 4th century, this was already happening. Actually, there's a fascinating, Olivia, put your phone away. This is something that was happening as early as the 4th century. So there's actually a travel diary that we have by a nun named Egeria. And Egeria was a Spanish, a Roman Spanish nun who pilgrimaged to the Holy Land in the 380s. And it's a fascinating text, and we could see this entire celebration of Holy Week, and she talks about walking the streets with palms. So very early on, Christians are doing this. And one of the gifts of this practice is getting out of your body. In my research for this, I learned that pews became a thing in churches in the 17th century. So up until then, you would have, there'd be some seating, but people would, have they'd sit on the floor, they'd squat, they'd maybe have a little stool. There's actually an aside, but one of the complaints in the English Reformation, there is a moment when the altar is brought down into the center of the church, and one of the complaints that is made is that, well, if the altar is down there, then dogs are going to come pee on it. And that sounds absurd, but obviously that means there were dogs in church. Animals were roaming around. And so this is, we have this association. If you go to church, you sit and you watch the holy thing happen up there. And I think it's one of the losses of the pew is that we feel passive. And one of the gifts of Palm Sunday and one of the gifts of the Triduum is that we get up out of our seats. We get out of our bodies, into our bodies and out of our heads and move around. And so this is really exemplified in Palm Sunday, and then as you'll see also in the Triduum. Now, one other note that so just liturgy, this is a helpful thing also for all of you as the people. Liturgy is short for, it's a Greek word, and it comes from leitos, which means public, and ergos, which means work. So liturgy is the public's work. It is you, the people, working together, doing the thing of worship. So, Maundy Thursday. Just a note, you'll see with all of these, I'm just going to show you where they are in the Bible. If you would ever want to read them yourself, that's where you would find them. Now, Maundy Thursday. Where are we? Palm 6, okay. So yes, this is the beginning of the Triduum. This is the beginning of the 3 holy days. And it sort of has 3 components, which we'll talk about, with the foot washing, the Eucharist, and then waiting. Now, number 1, why is it called Maundy Thursday? So that comes from the Latin mandatum. So I give you a new commandment to love one another. So mandatum is Jesus' new commandment to us, and so Maundy comes from that. The full quote is, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. So the first component of this service is the ritual foot washing. How many of you have ever participated in this and had your feet washed? That's actually more than I would have thought. Okay, good. It is an ancient tradition. Since at least the 7th century, Christians have been washing each other's feet on this day. And as it's practiced now, there's sort of 2 different ways of doing it. You can either have the leader of the church, the rector, or in this case, this is Pope Francis here, washing people's feet, who is showing servant leadership, embodying humility and servant leadership and washing people's feet. You can also do it where the congregation will wash each other's feet, where you line up and the person behind you, you wash their feet and they wash the next person's feet, etc., etc. I have done it both ways. I have found it powerful in both ways. It's interesting. It's a little weird. It's a little, it's not it's not this thing that we normally do. It's vulnerable. It's intimate to take someone's foot and wash it, to hold a stranger or even a beloved person's foot. I mean, shoot, I've washed my children's feet. I don't think I've ever washed my wife's feet. Certainly I've washed my parents' feet, not my brother's feet. And to all of a sudden in church, take people that you might have sit next to in a pew for 30 years and say, I'm going to hold your foot now and I'm going to wash it. And it's a real cracking open of the possibility. And this is, I know, a little bit strange, but I wonder what church might have been like if instead of the Eucharist being our central form of worship, it was foot washing. Because John's Gospel is the only one. John's Gospel does not have a bread and wine. I mean, we assume bread and wine were there, but the liturgy as we know it does not exist in John's Gospel. John centers foot washing. So just ponder that for yourself. Maybe you wouldn't be a Christian if you had to wash each other's feet every week. But just ponder what that means for your faith, to know that this is a piece of Christian humility, is washing each other's feet, showing up for each other in that very intimate way. So next, after the foot washing, we have a traditional Eucharist service. I include here actually the quote from 1 Corinthians because that is the earliest the earliest sorts we have for the words of institution. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, his first letter to the Corinthians is written in the early 50s. A few decades before any of the Gospels are put down. And Paul already is using basically the exact same words that we say every Sunday. So that's how ancient this practice is. That's how ancient these words and prayers are. Now, performing the Eucharist on this particular evening, on Maundy Thursday, has an especially deep resonance because we are remembering Jesus' last moment with his disciples. Jesus gathering at table, and we are enacting that on a Thursday in that exact way. It's interesting to note as well that in the three synoptic Gospels, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke, this meal is the first night of Passover. In John's Gospel, it is the night before the first night of Passover, which is, as John references, that is the night that all of the lambs are slaughtered for the Passover meal. So John really needs to make it head on. Jesus is the Paschal Lamb. Jesus is our sacrifice. So just that's always an interesting piece, just a note in that. After we finish our Eucharist, then there is the traditional stripping of the altar, which if you have never been to this service, I cannot emphasize enough how powerful this is to witness. All of the ornamentation, all of the decoration, every beautiful piece that you see on the altar is removed, while the choir sings or chants Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? And at the end of that, the altar is washed in symbolic remembrance of Christ's body being washed after he died and being cared for. And then the church is darkened and we leave in silence. It's this really heavy and weighty experience, and it really strikes you in a way that words never fully can. It makes the story real in a way that words never fully can. And this is why this is the work of liturgy, is because by doing the action, you get something different than just hearing the gospel story. One other piece of this is that during the washing of the altar, the remaining elements, so the bread and the wine that have been blessed, are brought over to a separate altar, which is called the altar of repose. Now, what is left on the altar, so actually this is a picture of an altar of repose in the Philippines, which I really thought was quite beautiful. The tradition then is that Christians will then sit by this altar, remembering Christ in Gethsemane, remembering how Jesus' disciples could not stay awake with him. And so the tradition is to have someone by the altar all through the night, so that Jesus has company on this most holy and terrifying of moments for him. This year, actually, we will be having an altar of repose. We're not going to go the full night, but we will have, the church will be open for people who want to pray between the hours, from the moment the service ends around 8:30 or so until midnight. So if you are interested, if you'd like to spend some time with Jesus in prayer, I really commend this to you. I've done it a bunch of times in a bunch of different ways, but one year, I'm a bit of a night owl. I was in my mid-20s, and I didn't have any small children to wake up to. So I actually decided, I took the 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. slot. And going into a darkened church in the middle of the night and just sitting there by candlelight next to the elements, it really hits it in just such a different way. And there are a number of different ways to pray. There are a number of different prayers that you can use, but to actually try to keep Jesus company in that and feel like you are a part of the story, it is a really powerful piece of our faith. Now, Good Friday. You might wonder, why is it called Good Friday? Which is a good question. It's interesting, I found a bunch of contradictory answers. There are some people who say, well, it's a confusion of it was God Friday and it became Good Friday, in the same way that goodbye is a shortening of God be with you. Other people said, no, that's wrong, there's no way. There are other sources that will say that it's a sort of archaic use of good, meaning like pious or holy, and that it's a sacred Friday. The other sources that I saw was just that this is a remembrance that Jesus' death opened up the way of life to us. And so it is good because of what we received from it, not because of Jesus dying was good, but that Jesus dying for our sake and rising again was good. One of the paradoxes of Good Friday is this piece of Jesus dying being a good thing. That there's actually, from very early Christians, compare the cross to the tree of life. That by dying, Jesus opens up this new way of life for us. And that it is a death, but it is also a new beginning. Now, so, as I said, at the end of Maundy Thursday, we leave the church in silence. Good Friday, again, we enter the church in silence. That is because these two services, though separated by 12 to, I can't do math off the top of my head, 15 hours, sure, let's say. Because they're separated by that much time, they're actually still one thing. It is all one story. And the tradition within the church is to have it as a 3-hour service from noon to 3 p.m., remembering Jesus' agony on the cross for those 3 hours before he died. The 3-hour service, there's actually a bit of variety on how you fill those 3 hours. There is a sort of traditional middle that I will talk about in a moment, but in fact, this year we will be doing things slightly different than last year, because one of the musical offerings that we had last year in the 3rd hour feasibly cannot be done because there are too many children on school break. So instead, there will be a Stations of the Cross meditation accompanied by organ. So there is variety in how this is approached. One of the things that always occurs is that there is a reading of the Passion Gospel, John's Passion Gospel, which is quite lengthy. I want to just acknowledge the anti-Judaism of this gospel, particularly John's Gospel. All the Gospels have these components, but John's Gospel is notable for that. John uses the term the Jews quite frequently, and it's this challenging piece of our faith, because context, the person who wrote John's Gospel was probably a Jew, so this is an internal argument. This is like you yelling at your cousin, so you can say meaner things to your cousin and get away with it than you can to somebody you don't know. So that's a piece of it. But there's also this confusion that in John's Gospel, John uses the word Jew in a variety of ways. It can be the Jewish leaders, which John is very much against. It can also just be the ethnic group. The Jews came out from Jerusalem to mourn with Mary and Martha after Lazarus' death. That's the way the story is told. But it is unfortunate that this sort of complication has then been used to justify anti-Semitism through the centuries. In fact, within our own prayer book, up until the 1928 prayer book sanitizes this prayer somewhat, and then the 79 prayer book just gets rid of it entirely. But up until the 28 prayer book, on Good Friday, one of the prayers said, "Have mercy upon all Jews, Turks, infidels, and heretics, and take from them all ignorance, hardness of heart, and contempt of thy word." So that's a piece of our tradition that we need to acknowledge and own. And I looked at, actually, there are different translations that you can use for the Passion Gospel, and I looked at a couple of them that nuance the Jews. They translate it to Jewish leaders in those ways. And I'll be honest, the translations just didn't sing in the same way. It just wasn't, not because of the word, but because it was not as good a translation. And so we're going to stick with the NRSV. But it's important to acknowledge that context. And so actually, a piece of this acknowledgement is, so in our prayers, this is the other big component of the Good Friday service, is we pray. So there is a long portion of prayer called the Solemn Collects. And this is a traditional form of prayer that really tries to open up our understanding of who is in God's circle, who belongs to God's people, and who belongs to God's care. And one of the new collects that has been added in the Episcopal Church last year, so this was approved at General Convention in 2024, and we will be using it this year, is a prayer for our Jewish brothers and sisters. Acknowledging the harm that has been done by Christians through the centuries and trying to repair that damage in what little way we can through prayer. So this is, I'm very proud of our church for doing this, and I think it's an important piece of complicating this story, because we can't just ignore that it's a piece of the story, but to just say nothing about it as well, that doesn't really help. So we need to share and acknowledge those traumas, but also keep moving ahead as best we can. One other significant component is the cross itself. So the cross is brought out in the service, and we are invited to kneel at it, or touch it, or venerate it in some way, and imitate actually in most of the stories, the disciples are gone. It's the women who stuck by Jesus' side to the very end, and they are the ones who are supporting him in his painful last moments. Now, at the end of the service, a bell is rung 33 times at 3 p.m. to remember Jesus' 33 years of life. The service then ends in silence again. We leave the church in silence. And there's one other piece of it, which was, so we, in that service, will take communion, but we do not consecrate any new communion. The communion that we receive is from the reserve sacrament. It's from the bread and wine that was left over from that Maundy Thursday service. If there is anything left over of that, it must be disposed of. To the Altar Guild people, you already know this, but to other folks, you might not be aware that if there is leftover host or leftover wine, you can't just get rid of it. So in the sacristy, there is a special sink called a piscina. And the piscina does not connect to the sewer system. It goes straight into the ground, because we treat the blood of Christ as Christ himself. And so we dispose of it and give it a proper burial and put it into the ground. Same thing with the bread. If you have ever seen a priest drop the host on the ground, if you don't see them immediately eat it, which is what I do because it's easier that way, they're not just tucking it in their pocket to throw it away. They're tucking it in their pocket because they know that is the body of Christ, and we treat it differently. So on Good Friday, all the physical remains of Christ in body and blood, in bread and wine, are gotten rid of. They are either consumed or they are put into the ground. So for that brief window of from 3 p.m. on Good Friday until the vigil of Easter, in which we consecrate new bread and wine, there is no remnant of the body of Christ and the blood of Christ in the church. It's that only moment. There is, in fact, a candle that you will see that is always lit in the back, in the front of the church, to the right of the altar. And that candle is always lit when there is when there are sacred elements in the church. This is the only time when that candle will not be lit. Now, the Easter Vigil. This is the doozy. This is, I mean, if you have never been, I'm going to just say right now, I love all these services. I am a liturgical nerd. I'm obviously in this work because I love this stuff, but I would encourage you to go all of them. Go to all three, experience all three in a row. It is a profound experience, and I think it will change your understanding of Easter. Because if you're only getting daffodils and lilies and trumpets on Sunday morning, you're missing a really important component of this. But let's say Friday, it's a beautiful day and you really want to go get golf. That's fine. You can go play golf. Let's say Thursday night you've got a meeting, you can't make it. Okay, that's fine. If you're going to go to one, the Easter Vigil, it is truly spectacular. So it begins in the dark. Unfortunately, I think we might need to move it back like half an hour next year because sunset's late this year. So ideally, the service starts in the dark. We're going to be starting just around sunset, maybe a little bit before sunset. We start at 7:30. Sunset's at 7:39. We begin by lighting a fire. This is the light of Christ. This is the new Paschal flame. And there are traditions of making massive bonfires. We cannot make a massive bonfire because the Greenwich Fire Department would not be a fan of that. But we make a sizable flame, and that flame is then prayed over, and the Paschal candle is lit from that flame. So we begin outside, and then we enter the church following the Paschal flame, following the Paschal candle, as the words, "the light of Christ," are chanted. And it's this reminder that Christ is this new light that is breaking in the world, and there's something changing, something special, something is happening. And this is one of the great geniuses of this Easter Vigil service, is that it's not past tense. So one of the following prayers after we sing the light of Christ, and we light all, so everyone has a candle. So this part is truly spectacular. Everyone has a candle, and then all the candles in the church are lit from that one candle. And so you watch the light of Christ spread through the darkened church. You watch this Holy Spirit move throughout the church until everyone has a flame in their hands. And it's at that moment that then the Exultet is sung. This is an ancient prayer that is beautiful, and it is sung, and it keeps saying, "This is the night." Not this was the night, this is the night. And it is a reminder that Christ's resurrection is timeless. It was, and it is, and it will be. This is part of who we are as Christians, that we recognize that Christ again and again rises from the dead for us, and that we are a part of that. Now, after all of the candles have been lit, we then sit down for a while. And there are any number, we're going to be doing 3 stories, but they're lengthy stories. And they're stories of God's grace and redemption through the ages. So the first story that we always hear is Genesis 1. In the beginning, when God began to create the heavens and the earth was a complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep. So we start with this image of creation. And it goes on through Noah, through Moses, through the prophets, and we have all these images of Christ, or of God working in the world. And we keep hitting on these themes of light and water, of the light of Christ and the water of baptism. Now, as I mentioned, it is traditional in this service, going back to ancient days, the tradition was to have baptisms at this service. At seminary, there was this is not a literal story, but it was a sort of a recreation, a reimagining of what an early Christian in the 4th century would have experienced on their baptism. And it's this wonderful story of, it's like 2 pages long or so, of this young man who he would have fasted. You would fast all night. So from Good Friday until the vigil, not eaten. And then in this and through the entirety of Lent, all these people who are planning to be baptized, these catechumens, would have been educated in what they were about to do, would have been brought up in the faith, would have been incorporated into the community and prepared for this evening. And so after having fasted all Good Friday, then on the night of the vigil, after the fire was lit, they would be brought into a baptistry on the other side, so away from the church. And men and women would be divided, and you would remove all of your clothes and be ducked under the water in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, like semi-drowned. And then you come up out of death, out of the water, because water and death very early with religious beliefs was associated with water and death were connected. So you come up out of the water, out of the death, into new life, born again as a Christian. And then you put on a white robe, you hug the person who sponsored you, who carried you through this process. And when all the other catechumens had been baptized and shared in this, then you would walk back across to the church, where the candlelit church would turn and applaud, cheer you, and welcome you into the new Christian family. And at that point, then you would receive communion for the first time. Now imagine if that was our baptism. Imagine if that was normative for us, and that was the goal of returning to this understanding of baptism as this opportunity to be reborn in Christ. Unfortunately, fortunately, unfortunately, that's just not the way we really do things very often right now. And so it's harder to find unbaptized people, particularly babies don't do so well at these late hours. So this year we will not have any baptisms, but within this point of the service, it is always traditional then to reaffirm our baptismal covenant. So we walk through the promises that were made over us when we were young children, infants, adults, whenever that moment happened. We will walk through those promises and act them out ourselves. Now, after the baptismal vows have been reaffirmed, then, boom, lights come up. Lights come up, bells ring. It's traditional that you can actually people can bring their own bells, ring bells, noisemakers, whatever it is. And it's that moment that we hear the words, I'm going to say it, Alleluia, Christ is risen. And it's this just pow, the joy of that moment of finally being able to say Alleluia again. I know I just said it twice, but finally being able to say it again in the context of worship, it just hits different. So I've got another personal story of when I was in South Africa doing mission work. I was living with some Episcopal brothers in a monastery in rural South Africa. And the brothers had this beautiful little campus in the hills, and they had this little church that faced east. And it was at the top of a hill, and there's this big valley underneath. And so we did the Easter Vigil as a sunrise service. So we began in the pitch dark by lighting the Easter flame. We then went to the refectory where we would eat meals, and we heard all the stories. We reaffirmed our faith, and then we all walked to the little chapel. And at that exact moment that the priest said, Alleluia, Christ is risen, and they start ringing the bells, the sun came up over the horizon. It was about as perfect as you can get. And that feeling of joy, that feeling of new creation, that feeling of I am part of something greater than myself is really a gift. So that is the joy of the Easter Vigil. Now, the rest of the service is a normal Eucharist, and I don't think I need to tell you about how a normal Eucharist goes. Nor do I think I need to say much about Easter Sunday itself. It should be pretty familiar by now. But I think it's helpful to remember that, as I said at the beginning, this service was lost because Christians didn't feel the need to make community in this way anymore. They didn't feel the need to to make meaning in this way anymore, to separate themselves and bind themselves in this way. But I think that the gift of this service and why these 3 services were brought back in the latter part of the 20th century is now that it is not normative to be a Christian, now that coming to church can be a somewhat peculiar affliction, having these opportunities to actually set ourselves apart and to join together and realize that we are one is really powerful. And this, I think, is one of the great gifts of being an Episcopalian. We don't have a complicated system of sets and beliefs that we need to follow. We don't keep track of all the dogma that you agree or don't agree with. We don't keep track of whether or not you like to kneel or stand. We don't keep track of whether or not you like incense or you just want plain windows. The only thing that we really care about is that we use the same book. What makes us special as Episcopalians is that we are bound by worship. We are bound by praying together in the same way, the same language, and there is certainly a lot of variety in that. But that we all know what the words should be. And this is the gift of the Vigil of Easter. The last thing I want to say is that these 3 services are spectacular. And Easter morning, coming back and you have the flowers and you have the brass and you have the church packed is spectacular. But the thing that we also need to remember is that it is always Easter. As we were hearing in the Exalted, this is the night. Christ has always died and risen. Christ dies and rises again and again on our behalf every day. And Sunday, the reason why we celebrate church on Sunday is because we are remembering Christ returning on that day. There was an active debate in the early church. Do we continue to worship on Saturday, on the Sabbath, as Jews had for centuries? Or do we worship on this new day, this day after the Sabbath, this day when Jesus rose again? And that's why we worship on Sundays, because we are remembering Christ's return. So, yes, it is Lent, but also it was just Easter upstairs. It is Easter right now, here today. And so always remember that you are a Christian and you proclaim the risen Christ. Amen. Thank you. We've got a few minutes for questions if anyone has them. Yes. Do we have another mic? Oh, okay, I'll just... Yes, that is correct. That is an unusual thing. Orthodox Christmas or Orthodox Easter is the same as Western Church Easter this year. That is very rare, but it happened this year. Yes. Yes. Mary, yeah. Okay.
Mary.
Oh.
One of the traditions that I have really appreciated from the Orthodox tradition is about Holy Saturday. And we don't seem to observe that or even mention it, but to me it's always also very moving. And there are beautiful icons that are painted about that is the day that Jesus, and we have it in the Apostles' Creed, descends into hell. Mm-hmm. And what does he do down there? The icons show him, right, exactly, pulling up everyone who has gone to hell from time immemorial. And to me that is so meaningful because that was, I remember as a child, that was always a question that I had. What about those people that never had a chance to know Jesus? Like, are they condemned? So, I mean, this has always just been a beautiful image to me. We don't really say the Apostles' Creed that often. Certain times we do. But I just wonder if you have any understanding of why we kind of don't mention that.
So it is in the prayer book. There is an Easter Saturday service in the prayer book. It's quite brief. Yeah, I think basically we're just keeping our powder dry. Honestly, as much as anything, I think it's just after Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and then into the Vigil, people were like, I can't do one more. I gotta save my energy. That's yeah.
Well, and having been raised in the Orthodox Church, the Easter service is at midnight, and it's 4 hours. And on Good Friday, there's a almost life-size icon of Jesus at the altar, and you come venerate him as if it were a funeral. And then you go around the church outside, process 3 times with this icon, and when you walk in, the lights are on. And but it's a 4-hour service, so yeah.
All right, we'll work on that. Merrick
It's a very tough sell on Episcopalians, Lisa. One thing to point out is the Easter Vigil only came into existence in the Episcopal Church with the 1979 Book of Common Prayer. So for centuries among Anglicans, that service had been omitted altogether. And that was a big part of the 79 Book of Common Prayer to bring that back. It is the oldest and most traditional service. Long before we have any history of a recording of a Christmas celebration, we celebrate the Easter Vigil. And that always took place in the middle of the night, where the new, baptismal candidates would come forward, and it was just transformational. The only time of the year where you could be baptized was the Easter Vigil. You couldn't say, well, I can't get my family in town that weekend. Can we do the third Sunday in June? Because that's when I could get the most of the family. That was not an option. Other questions? Yes. Carrie.
So we give out the palms on Palm Sunday with like the little crosses put together, and talking about how you're supposed to properly get rid of the body and the blood of Christ. What is the proper way to get rid of the palms from Palm Sunday? Because I'll have like 7 tucked up above the in my car above the windshield thing. So how are we supposed to properly get rid of those?
Yeah, the expectations of blessed things that are not the body and blood of Christ is like a little wishy-washy. Like people are like, what do we do with holy water? And it's like, ideally, what you would do is you would save it until a little bit before Ash Wednesday, and you would burn it and then use those ashes to mark people on Ash Wednesday. Yes, that's the ideal, but it's okay.
That is what we do with the used palms, by the way. That's where the ashes come from. Other questions? Well, then on behalf of everyone, Tim, I want to thank you. You're a masterful teacher. You put a lot of work in this. We love your passion for liturgy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all for coming out. Have a beautiful week ahead.